Hey, welcome and welcome back to the Stash. The amazing Spider-Man, the spectacular Spider-Man, the sensational Spider-Man, the ultimate Spider-Man, whatever adjective you prefer. Because at his best, all those words perfectly describe the type of hero Spider-Man is. But he's not just a superhero. He's a promise. A reminder that no matter how many times life knocks you down, no matter how impossible it feels to keep going, you have to try. That's one of the things he's always meant to me. For as long as I can remember, Spider-Man has been my hero. Not because he's invincible or godlike, but because he's like us. Because he's just a normal guy given extraordinary powers, which he uses for the greater good every single day of his life. And several years ago, I decided to take that connection further. I made the choice to dive into every single Spider-Man comic ever written. Thousands of issues, decades of storytelling. Sure, it was a daunting challenge, but it was so much more than that. It was a way to reconnect with the character who has shaped so much of my life. I wasn't just looking for Spider-Man's history. I was looking for the pieces of myself that he's carried along the way. And I feel like that this journey for me, or for you if you've done the same, isn't just about the comics. It's about what Spider-Man means to us as fans. About how his story reflects our own, and about the lessons he teaches us if we're willing to listen. Spider-Man has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. Growing up, my room was filled with action figures, comics, DVDs, you name it. Marvel and DC were always there. I liked a lot of the characters, from Batman to all of X-Men to Iron Man, Hulk, and whoever else I had a figure of. But Spider-Man was different. He wasn't invincible or untouchable. He wasn't a billionaire or an alien. He was just a kid, figuring out as he went along. That relatability made all the difference to me. As a child, I saw Spider-Man as more than just a superhero. He was someone I could look up to. I'd spend hours with my Spider-Man action figure crafting my own stories, from intense action-packed episodes to more somber reflections. I tried my best to recreate what I saw on my TV, to recreate that authentic Spider-Man charm. But the one I always used to do was Spider-Man seemingly facing the impossible odds, yet somehow through it all, actually managed to win. From an early age, I felt the humanity behind the mask. I knew that core aspect of his character. For Spider-Man wasn't just a hero, he was someone who taught me it was okay to struggle as long as you kept going. Now, one of my most cherished childhood memories were all the times my dad and I would head into our local comic shop. To an outsider, it probably looked like nothing special, just a dusty, crammed space with toys and comics practically overflowing everywhere you look, but to me, it was like my home away from home. The moment you stepped inside, the air felt different. It smelled like adventure, like possibility. I'd run navigating the best I can to the long boxes and immediately start flipping through the Spider-Man section. Every cover was a window into a new world, a new story waiting to be explored. I'd beg my dad to buy me whichever issue caught my eye, and when he did, it felt like I was holding treasure. Even now, years later, as I skim through my now massive Spidey comic collection, I can look at those same issues and feel the magic of that comic shop, the place where my love for Spider-Man truly began to expand. There was one book in particular that I cherished as a kid, and that was The Best of Spider-Man Volume 2. This book honestly never left my side. From relatives' place to school to wherever. I'd have that book and I'd be reading it all the time. It featured so many classic stories by John Romita Jr. and J. Michael Straczynski, an era that I now personally love to death. But it was such a crucial part of me growing up because I used to just read those same stories over and over again, and it never got old. And that was a part of the magic of Spider-Man and comics. And I'm so happy that I still have that book because I can look back, and as I flip through the pages, I feel like that kid once more that would sit there ignoring whatever's going around him and just fully enthralled into the world of Spider-Man. But for years, I read Spider-Man in a messy, unstructured way. I'd grab a random issue I owned and follow along the best I could. I even had a phase growing up where I had a bunch of Marvel Tales reprints so I could actually read a lot more of the stories. Plus, in my own head, I thought it was so cool to be able to feel like I owned classic grails, even if they were only worth like $5 max. The way I'd read comics worked, but it always left me feeling like there was way too many gaps. Like I was severely missing something, and that's pretty understandable. I love Spider-Man clearly, but I didn't fully understand him. Well, not yet. That's when I decided to set a goal. to read every single Spider-Man comic, not just the main series, but everything. The Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, Spider-Man Unlimited, and every spin-off in between. You see, to me, it wasn't just about completing a checklist. It was about diving deep into a character who'd been there for me throughout so much of my life, and it felt like a way to give back to a hero who had given me a whole new world. But before I began this massive reading journey, there was one Spider-Man series I had already read in full, and that was none other than Ultimate Spider-Man. Now, I played the game to death throughout my childhood, but I properly discovered the comic when I was 16, and it was a game changer. At that time in my life, I was struggling. High school fucking sucked. I didn't have many friends, and I often felt out of place. But then, I found Ultimate Spider-Man, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. Peter Parker was my age, dealing with bullies, insecurities, and the overwhelming weight of responsibility. I connected with how he wasn't just a superhero, he was someone who understood what I was going through. And reading those comics felt like talking to a friend who had been there, who could show me that it was okay to struggle. Now, that series didn't just make me love Spider-Man even more. It gave me a new spark of life during one of the most hardest times I had growing up. And so, because of that, I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for that series. It's one I always love to dive back into time and time again. But when I officially began my full reading journey, there was no question about where to start. It had to be Amazing Fantasy issue 15, the story that started it all. Now, sure, I've read that before when I had my reprints, but it just felt right. Reading that issue followed by The Amazing Spider-Man issue 1 was like stepping back in time. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's work feels dated in some ways, that's natural, but at its core, it's timeless. Peter Parker's struggle with school, money, and relationships resonate just as much today as they did in the 60s. And if I'm being honest, the entirety of the Silver Age for Spidey is an absolute blast, especially the Lee and Ditko era. I remember getting so hyped reading issue 32 called Man on a Rampage because the way that iconic duo captured Peter's rage and desperation was nothing short of incredible. I will admit though, when I was at the very start, I felt overwhelmed. I mean, there were thousands of issues, decades of continuity. I wouldn't blame anyone who expressed doubt in the task, but as I got deeper into the stories, that feeling of me being overwhelmed faded and quickly shifted to me just being completely hooked and immersed within the world. Each issue was just better than the next, and it slowly revealed the bigger picture of who Spider-Man is. And the more I read, the more I became enthralled with the comics, because it wasn't just about the action or the villains, it was about the humanity at the heart of every single issue. Now, there are the big stories everyone talks about. The night Gwen Stacy died, Kraven's Last Hunt, If This Be My Destiny, and all of those rightfully deserve the spotlight. I adore those comics. But some of the most meaningful moments came from the stories I didn't expect to love nor originally knew about before starting this journey. Take Just a Guy Named Joe as an example. It's one most of the fandom simply forgets about, and I understand why, but for some reason this small story, this finale of sorts to Ditko's time on the book, is one of my favorites to reread from the Silver Age because there's something about it that just makes it so much fun to me. Maybe it's the action-packed nature of the issue, or even the happy ending showing Joe Smith becoming an actor and finally being able to go out on the right path to make a name for himself, but either way, this issue was an odd highlight for me. Another story I really enjoyed was The Death of Vermin by one of my most favorite Spider-Man pairings ever, J.M. DeMatteis and Sal Buscema. It's a haunting, intense exploration of trauma and redemption. I just honestly want to do a whole video about that story because I love that era of Spider-Man comics. This one's got such good character moments, ones that I still think about to this day. It was that impactful, as well as some of my absolute favorite Peter and Mary Jane Watson moments. You see, for stories especially like The Death of Vermin, it isn't about saving the world, they're about saving people. They're about the quiet human moments that make Spider-Man more than just a superhero, and I believe it's these comics that truly elevated his character beyond those he'd shared the shelves with. But the one story that hit me harder than I expected was the death of Jean DeWolf. I always knew going into reading this one that the Sin Eater kills DeWolf, but nonetheless the impact and shock the story had on me didn't lessen. Not one bit. For seeing that haunting image of DeWolf's shot immediately put me on the edge of my seat, and with that I was fully ready to read this Peter David masterclass. This story is a raw, unflinching exploration of justice, grief, and morality, and watching Peter confront the Sin Eater is brutal. I adored how it's not just a physical battle. Granted, there was a lot of action, but more so it was an emotional one. This story properly makes Spider-Man have to grapple with his own anger, his own sense of responsibility. It's the kind of story that stays with you, reshaping the way you see Spider-Man and the world around him in the best way possible. And if you haven't by some chance already read it, then you need to add this one to your list because it is an all-time Spidey classic. Now, before I forget, there's a few artists that I personally believe deserve a bit more of a spotlight for their time on Spider-Man, so I wanted to take a second to give them some appreciation. I always loved Alex Saviak's work on Web of Spider-Man. In fact, when I think of that title, I immediately see his art in my head. And similarly to Alex in that sense as well, has got to be Sal Buscema. He's one of my favorites of all time, especially when he was properly in his flow in the 90s. Granted, Sal does get more credit within the Spidey community, but I still feel like he deserves to be known as one of the greats. But now for my last pick, I'm not sure if it's because he came right after Todd McFarlane and right before Bagley, but Eric Larson has always been a favorite of mine. He's similar to Todd in ways, yes, but I always found his civilian drawings way more easier on the eyes. In fact, his Mary Jane design is without a doubt one of my favorites. I mean, just look at that hair. But those are just some artists that I believe deserve some more appreciation. I could honestly talk about it for hours. Anyway, it's no secret Spider-Man's world is one of, if not the richest in all of Marvel Comics. And one of the reasons it feels so alive is because of his supporting cast. Those he shares the pages with are not just side characters. They're fully realized people with their own stories and struggles. And now reading all the comics obviously meant I'd grow attached to some of the cast of characters within Spidey's world, but what I wasn't expecting was to be so enthralled to the point where I liked every single character there. Yes, even you, Nick Katzenberg. For they all served their purpose. They all had their own individual arcs. They all mattered. Flash Thompson is a prime example. Once Peter's bully, but by the 90s they were actually pretty much close friends. But the greatest of all for the side characters has got to be Mary Jane Watson. I mean, besides Spidey himself, my favorite character in all of his comics is easily MJ. Seeing her go from the party girl to the best wife possible was an incredible and rewarding story arc to follow. One of my favorite moments comes right after the death of Gwen Stacy, where Peter tries to push MJ away, telling her to leave, to get out and go party like she normally did a lot back then, but she doesn't. This time, instead, she stays, teary-eyed but determined, and that's when I knew MJ was special. That's when I first properly saw that Mary Jane wouldn't just grow to be a part of Peter's life, but instead, she'll grow to be the heart of it. It's impossible not to talk about this one, isn't it? Now, there's no sugarcoating this one. One More Day is a stain on Spider-Man's legacy. It's not just a bad story, it's a betrayal of everything that makes Peter Parker who he is. After decades of watching Peter grow, of seeing him take responsibility for his choices and build a life with Mary Jane Watson, this story erased all of it with a deal made with the literal devil. Peter Parker, the man who has always carried the weight of his mistakes, who has taught us that growth comes through struggle, chooses to undo it all. For what? To save Aunt May from a fate she herself would have accepted, to preserve the illusion of youth and reset Peter's life? It felt cheap, cynical, and worst of all, it felt lazy. One More Day didn't just strip away years of character development, it undermined Spider-Man's core principle that with great power comes great responsibility. This wasn't responsibility, this was escapism, and it hurt. Not to mention that the entirety of Civil War had him out of character as well. He would never have revealed his identity in the first place. That's another annoying thing about it all, is that just it's built of characters not acting like themselves. It was so forced. And to make things worse, the years that followed, even to this day, didn't make anything better. Stories like Brand New Day and all that came after it all felt hollow, as if the very heart of the character had been ripped out. Mary Jane, a character who had grown into Peter's equal and his partner in every sense of the word, was reduced to a footnote, a what if in Peter's life, a punching bag for the editorial team. Their marriage was one of the most beautifully developed relationships in comics, and it was erased, replaced by endless cycles of shallow romances and gimmicks. And so, for me, reading through Spider-Man's history made One More Day and everything after it feel even worse, especially Zebwell's run. To have that hope Nick Spencer gave us just ripped out of our hearts by him was just, it's an experience that I certainly won't forget it, but it's one I wish I could forget. After seeing Peter grow from an awkward teenager to a man who built a life with the love of his life, and to see it all erased so casually, it was heartbreaking. It's not just bad storytelling, it's insulting to the fans who have followed Peter's journey for years on end. But here's the thing, One More Day and its aftermath didn't destroy Spider-Man. Not really, because the stories that came before, the ones that shaped Peter Parker into the hero we all know and love, they still exist. They're still there, waiting to be rediscovered and discovered by a new generation of fans to remind us why this character matters. And I believe that in the grand scheme of things, they've endured because Spider-Man's spirit is bigger than any bad era. So yes, I despise One More Day. I despise what it did to Spider-Man and how it cast a shadow over so much of his legacy. But it can't erase the decades of stories that came before it. Those stories, the ones that show Peter's growth, his love, his resilience, are the reason Spider-Man is still around today. Yes, One More Day, even Nick Lowe now, is trying to take all of that away, but I still don't believe it has succeeded. Granted, the current state of the books are beyond dead, but the classics, the ones that we all adore, are all still just as good. Because Spider-Man isn't defined by bad editorial decisions. He's defined by the countless of amazing stories presented to us over the decades, and a major aspect of those comics that made them so special were the lessons we've learned from him, and those lessons are unshakable. Now, throughout the decades, one of the most important things Spider-Man teaches us is that growth, as I've said before, comes through struggle. That it's the hard moments, the losses, the failures, the impossible choices that shape us into who we are meant to become. Every tragedy in Peter Parker's life feels monumental. The death of Uncle Ben, Gwen Stacy, and Harry Osborn. The times he's pushed people away to protect them only to find himself more alone. These aren't just story beats. These aren't just an excuse to torture Peter himself like we so often see today. No, instead, they're reminders. Reminders that growth is rarely clean or easy. It can be painful, it can be messy, and yet it's through these moments that Spider-Man becomes more than just a man in a mask. But what truly sets Spider-Man apart is that he isn't perfect. He doesn't always make the right choice, and he doesn't always win. He screws up, he lets people down, he gets angry, and yet he always gets back up. That's the heart of Spider-Man. He's not a hero because he's flawless. He's a hero because he refuses to quit. And one of the greatest examples of this, I feel like, has to be Spider-Man helping the entire Daily Bugle building stay up by basically replacing a support beam. He is practically lifting the building up. And through it all, Jameson is bashing him. He is still verbally abusing him for all of his deeds. And he even gets the crowd to turn on Spidey. Even in that moment, he understandably begins to doubt himself. He begins to wonder why he's bothering. But then he sees MJ's face, teary-eyed in the crowd, praying that her husband is okay. And it is in that moment where he regains his pride, he regains his strength, and continues to lift up the building to save it from going under. He refuses to quit. He refuses to let those around him bashing him to bother him. And he continues to fight. Because his story isn't just about achieving greatness, it's about striving for it, even when it feels impossible. He teaches us to try, and that's a lesson I believe we can all carry with us. That it's okay to fall as long as we find the strength to stand again. Because being a hero, being human, isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. And Spider-Man, especially pre-One More Day Spider-Man, displays that to a T. Now, when I started this journey, I was in a place I think many of us have found ourselves at one point or another. A place of uncertainty, loneliness, and self-doubt. It felt like the world around me was shifting faster than I could keep up. Friends who once seemed like constants in my life had drifted away. Relationships that I thought would last forever unraveled, leaving me questioning not just them, but myself. Who I was, what did I want to be? These were questions I couldn't answer, and the silence that followed was overwhelming. But in the midst of all that, Spider-Man was there. Not physically, of course, but through the pages of those comics, he was this quiet, unwavering presence that reminded me I wasn't alone. For no matter how much life threw at Peter Parker, he kept moving. He struggled, just like I did. He felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sure, differently in some ways, but just like I did. And yet, no matter how hard things got, he never gave up. Instead, he kept trying, he kept fighting, and showed me, and many others, that it's all worth it. Reading those stories during that time in my life reminded me that even when everything feels like it's falling apart, there's always a way forward. You just have to keep trying. Spider-Man represents something universal: hope, resilience, and the belief that anyone, no matter how ordinary or flawed, has the potential to rise above their circumstances. Peter Parker's story is a testament to the idea that greatness isn't something you're born with. It's something that you earn through choices, through perseverance, through refusing to give up even when the odds are stacked against you. For as Spider-Man said best, anyone can win a fight when the odds are easy. It's when the going's tough, when there seems to be no chance. That's when it counts. Spidey's not a billionaire genius or a god from another world. He's a guy from Queens who's just trying to do his best. He's a hero defined not by perfection, but by his refusal to stop striving for better. Now, to the creators who brought this world to life, from Stan Lee to Steve Ditko, John Romita Sr., and the countless of others who followed, thank you. You didn't just craft a comic book icon, you gave us a character who reflects our own struggles and aspirations. Someone who reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to act in spite of it. Spider-Man embodies the power of persistence, the beauty of imperfection, and the idea that heroism is something we can all be capable of when we choose to take responsibility for ourselves and for others. Through Spidey, we see that the extraordinary often begins with the ordinary. And that's why he resonates so deeply with all of us. This journey has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. As someone who collects comics, who has spent years admiring and celebrating this character, diving into every single Spider-Man issue, literally thousands of comics, was both a challenge and a joy. Sure, it wasn't perfect. There's definitely almost 20 years of slop, thanks to One More Day and all of Nick Lowe's time on the book, but even those moments couldn't diminish the sheer joy I felt experiencing Spider-Man's world during the first 40-odd years of the character. At its heart, reading through Spider-Man's history isn't just about following the adventures of a superhero. It's about connecting with a character who feels so deeply human, so profoundly relatable, that his struggles and triumphs start to feel like your own. Every arc, every twist, every iconic moment builds on what came before, creating a tapestry that's as much about personal growth as it is about saving the day. So if you're a Spider-Man fan or even just someone who loves comics, I can't recommend this journey enough. Whether you've read a few issues here or there or none at all, diving into Spider-Man's history is one of the most rewarding things you could do for yourself. It's not just about the action or the drama. It's about seeing how this character, Peter Parker's Spider-Man, has evolved, how he's endured, and how he continues to inspire millions of fans around the world. It's not always easy, but trust me, it's worth it. Okay, well, you're better off just ignoring everything after Amazing Spider-Man issue 500.